And we're live. Cool. Hello and welcome to TKB Live. We have successfully defeated the technical difficulties, I hope. If not, you can blame me. I am your host, Daniel Neville, and I'm joined by my lovely co-host, the illustrious Thomas Rose, who you
Hello,
may know.
good evening. I think we got 2-0 by technical difficulties, so we're like playing them again at this point.
Yeah. It's best of 7, right?
Either that or this is just a game for pride.
I mean, pride is very important. Tops, not important. Pride, very, very important. Welcome to the stream, everybody. So, it is, I believe we are just finished week 3 of Dark Neostorm format.
This is our 4th stream, and the first one was prior to the release of Dark Neostorm, just after the sneak peek.
Yeah, so we have some things to talk about. I think, first off, what did we do with our weekends? You had the more competitively interesting weekend. You travelled up to the IQ Games Huddersfield Regional.
Yeah, really good store. I've been there a couple of times before and performed really poorly, but on my 3rd visit to Huddersfield, I managed to make it past round 3 of a tournament, which was nice. Made a refreshing change.
Tom is echoing. I will try and fix that. Yeah, the last time I went to Huddersfield with you, you got cherries on Dante like 4 or 5 games in a row, was it?
No, it was only 3 games in a row. It was my round 3. I was playing against a Ritual Beast player. This was in the middle of Warrior format, like Goki's everywhere. Goki the best deck at the time. My round 3 opponent was playing Ritual Beasts with an 8-card extra deck. Didn't own a Sold, but still main decking cherries. Maybe 3. I don't know. At least 1 copy of Ghost Reaper and Winter Cherries was in his main deck. And on my first turn in all 3 games, I got Reapered for cherries. And Reapered for Dante. And I went 1-2 at that point and swiftly left the venue.
Yeah. It was unfortunate. So this time went better. You were playing Orkest for this event. How are you feeling about the format at this stage? Like, Orkest is definitely a more established deck than it was prior to Dark Neostorm. Does that change how you're playing the deck? Or
it makes it harder to play the deck because there's a lot more hate for it in the meta. It's definitely on everyone's radar as one of the decks to be aware of. And so you see a lot more people like prepared for it. Everyone knows what your cards do. And for the most part, they're like ready to play against it. I think that it might even be so much so that a lot of Orkest players are struggling to get such strong results as the deck saw initially because the meta is prepared and possibly even over-prepared to play against it.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of things like Artifact Lancias being sided in triplicate. How are you finding Mystic Mine at the moment? Because that's a deck which definitely had been one of the kind of contenders to beat Orkest in the format. And from what I've been seeing this week, it really seems to have fallen off in popularity.
Fine.
It's fine.
Yeah. The Mystic Mine Splash, like you just need 1 out because they aren't playing anyway to negate an MST. The pure Mystic Mine deck, Trickstar Light Stage, like you just take out all of their back rows and you only need to find your way again. Once you can get rid of all of the Dark Bribes with Light Stages, you only need to find 1 MST for the mine and you're good to go.
Yeah, okay. Did you encounter any mine this weekend in terms of the pure deck, or?
I mean, it was an 8-round tournament. I don't play any pure mine, but I played Jake Quincy on the Striker Mine deck in round 8.
And you ended up winning that matchup, right?
Yeah, I won that match, but I'd already taken a loss in round 2 to a Salamangreat player. Like there were a lot of mistakes in that game. Some of them were even mine. But
early in the day, or
round 2, I took a loss, which was really early. So my tiebreakers were already looking fairly poor at that point, and a lot of the players that I went on to play after taking an early loss proceeded to drop for the end of the event. But like that's why you need to make sure that you win your early rounds. And so there were 4 players all on 7-1 at the end of the day, but my score was the worst of the lot of them, sadly.
That's unfortunate. Regardless, still points for the Worlds race. You are currently standing 3rd place on that still, right?
Well, we're waiting on an update. I think Paolo has posted quite recently saying that there'll be an update this Friday. Oh, sorry, excuse me. And so I expect to be around 3rd, but obviously everyone's in a bit of a last-minute scramble before nationals at this point. None of the top contenders will have played nationals yet because the Italian and German nationals, I believe, are both at the first weekend of June, and the French and UK nationals are the second weekend of June.
I believe Italian is the last weekend. I think it's the 15th.
Okay.
16th. Yeah.
Sure.
German.
Definitely first and second German.
Yeah. There's a few other on that weekend.
3 consecutive weekends at the start of June are the 4 nationals that award up to a maximum of 128 points. And anyone that's in contention for the top 8 in Europe will be playing in one of those 4 because you're limited to 1 national championships as it stands.
Yeah. So there's we've seen a couple of nationals this weekend. We had Peru, which was won by Striker, I believe. And then Salamangreat won Austrian nationals. Marcello Barberi won Hungarian nationals. We don't know for sure what deck he was playing.
Marcello.
That's his third win. Crazy. So I believe he was playing Striker for that, but I don't have confirmation. And then Bulgarian nationals was also on the weekend, but I don't have any info on what decks topped that event.
If there was anyone in the chat who was at those events, happens to know what won it, let us know, and we can give credit to the deck and ideally the person.
Yeah. We actually have an interesting list, which we will be putting a profile up for very soon. But a American player, Adrian Dolish, I believe, played the Detroit Regionals, and he managed to get top 4 playing Danger Orkest. Cool. And I believe there was about 300 players at that event.
Nice.
But something cool that he was playing was he had El Shaddai Winda, which is something that has been seeing play. But he wasn't committing to the Shaddai fusion stuff. He was just playing instant fusions to bring it out. And then you'd connector, see if your opponent had, if your opponent was on combo, you could just instant fusion into Winda. And
then you leave the Dingus.
Yeah. What's your thoughts on that tech in the Orkest deck at the moment?
It's not a line that I'm generally favoring, particularly in my deck, playing so many cards. Given that I'm much less likely in any one game to have the connector, it's less likely that I have that hand information, and it's not an opening play that you would ever want to commit to unless you had good reason to believe that the special summon lockdown from Winda was going to be an effective win. Most games, it's much safer to set up with Bogblades and the Dingirsu in the grave ready to be summoned out.
Yeah. We have Team Mambo in the chat who heard Dinos was top 5 at Turkish Nats. Team Mambos just won't let the dinos die. We also have Alinti Yo in the chat, so hello.
Hi, Will.
But and a bunch of other people. Hello, everybody else. Thank you all for joining us. Yeah, it's kind of crazy how much diversity Orkest has in terms of deck building, because I think it's the one deck where, like, I've been looking at win percentages on Yu-Gi-Oh! Scope, and like the variance between the different builds of Orkest is really interesting.
Okay.
All of them are kind of in the 60+% region, which is already very high. Yeah.
So I don't think that it's been doing that well at paper events. So it's remarkable that it's had so much success online.
Yeah, so I mean, it's still been topping a lot of regionals, and it's been winning a good few regionals, but I mean, obviously online you have a lot of things diluted because there's going to be very different decks played because people can just play anything. But like, it's the fourth, just a pure Danger Orkest build is the fourth most represented at the moment, and that version has a 62% win rate, and then like Striker is showing a 63. But again, you start getting kind of less significant figures. But clearly the deck has a very high win percentage.
Yeah.
Salamangreat and Sky Striker are also both showing roughly 60% win rates, with about 8,000 to 9,000 games for Salamangreat, really showing how popular the deck is. And with about 4,000 games, Striker has a 59% win rate.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, the statistics that come out of Yu-Gi-Oh! Scope, because it's, as far as I'm aware, the first sampled Yu-Gi-Oh! Data that is approaching a size where you can actually draw realistic conclusions from it. There was a tweet that was featured in an article I read recently as a Magic the Gathering article that I think you'd posted, or somewhere in the Kuribrohs.
I do post a lot of Magic articles to Kuribrohs.
But it was saying Magic the Gathering, but you could replace that with any like high-level competitive TCG, is the art of deciphering accurate conclusions from statistically insignificant sample sizes.
Yeah, exactly. Which is hilarious because it's very accurate. And Magic has a case where, like, you have Magic Arena now and you have Magic Online, which both are official resources, and people are able to aggregate data from that. And like, even the design teams are able to say, hey, look, we're hitting this deck because we can see that the online statistics are showing that it's performing better. That actually happened today. Their Pauper format, which is commons only, just banned a bunch of cards. They basically have an upstart goblin printed in Magic, which lets you see your opponent's hand, and for some reason it wasn't banned in that format. But
I'd play that card.
Oh, Gitaxian Probe is just like absurd. I don't know why they printed that card. But regardless, it's kind of interesting. Like, the online resources we have for Yu-Gi-Oh! Are so much more primitive than the other two of the big three card games.
Yeah.
So it does mean that, like, again, with Orkest, while we have that fast progression that online allows compared to before the online simulators, we don't really reach the consensus in the same way that the other games do. And I think that's why we see Orkest kind of still branching in so many different directions.
Do you think that Magic is an easier game to fully automate as a simulator? Because I get the impression that Pokemon had a simulator, like a very good simulator, very early on, because it has so little interaction when it's off your turn. So in the same way that you can play a game of Hearthstone and you could look away from your screen whilst your opponent has their turn and just come back for your go.
I mean, Pokemon has that simulator still, and they haven't updated it since, so it's really feeling its age at this point.
Okay.
It's still like perfectly acceptable, and they have the thing that they include the codes in every booster pack and with every specialty product, so you get to like just scan a QR code or enter some letters and numbers, and you get the pack in the game as well.
Oh, that's cool.
You don't get the exact pack, but you just get a random booster pack. Same set, different contents.
Yeah.
But so that's a really good system of pulling people in and increasing playtime. And when you increase playtime of your players, you automatically, you effectively start increasing the understanding of a format.
Yeah.
Pokemon and Magic, I think it definitely helps that they have the rotating formats in that regard, because in both of them you're able to just have a case that it's super easy for new players to get in. Yu-Gi-Oh! To get into competitive is a lot more difficult. It's a lot easier to get into the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game because you watch the anime, you pick up a character deck, and you have a Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck, and you know how to play the game. But getting into competitive, you need to wait for something like the Salamangreat Soulbringer Structure deck. Really good intro product. The Pendulum deck is really good. I'm hoping that we see some more of the Pendulum stuff reprinted, because there are some things that make it kind of difficult to pick up that deck as a first deck. But both of those are relatively budget and accessible, and both of them are Salamangreat I think is one of the top 3 decks at the moment. I don't think there's really much debate on that. It is just in the tier 1 of the meta, and then Pendulum is either tier 1 or else it's tier 1.5.
So I think that Salamangreat definitely sees a much greater representation, but I would always be much more afraid of sitting down and facing off against the Pendulum player right now. I feel like the deck does more, and is harder to beat.
I mean, I feel like you might be somewhat biased because Pendulum is more your type of deck than Salamangreat is. Like, I think that Pendulum is more interesting, and I think if you are trying to win an event, that makes Pendulum, like, the discussion we always have of, are you playing this deck to top the event, or are you playing the deck to win the event? And Pendulum is the deck that you play to win the event. Whereas Salamangreat is the more kind of conservative deck. So I think they're both relatively strong. Like, there are times where you just say, hey, look, I have a Salamangreat board. I just have consistent redundancy in my cards, so I'm just always going to do stuff. So I don't know if I would say one is necessarily better than the other, but Salamangreat is definitely more represented, and I think that is mainly just due to the fact that it is more accessible. Tafin has just posted Pendulum with a little heart in the comments because he loves his Zephyrs.
It's definitely one of the best decks going right now, and I think that there might be some bias, not just from it being more the deck that I'm likely to play, but I think that it might appear stronger in the meta game because it's less attractive to newer players. So if you were to consider the player base as a whole, I think that the average quality of Pendulum player is probably higher at the moment than the average quality of a Salamangreat player. So that might be affecting how I view it.
Yeah, I think Pendulum, like, you do have to learn a lot more in terms of combos and how your cards interact. Like, I tried picking up the Pendulum deck, and I was messing about with it, and I was just like, I don't know how any of these combos work, and I would consider myself quite comfortable with the format, but without finding external guidance, I found it very confusing to kind of stumble my way through the Guard Dragon parts of the deck. So I think that's quite interesting.
Okay.
And also, Pendulum, you have so many different variants, which is a lot more exciting. Whereas Salamangreat, you have am I playing 1 foul or am I playing 3 foul? Am I playing
Are there people who play 3 foul?
I have seen people trying to play 3 foul. So there's a misnomer that was caused by Goki. And so because we saw a lot of players starting playing during the Code of the Duelist format, they saw Goki, and Goki would have been one of the first competitive decks that they really saw issue with. And so they're like, oh, well, Goki is so good because it has all of these extenders. And so you get to the point where you're like, oh, well, Foul is an extender. And there's also the thing that, like, Foul can chain block your Balinks and stuff.
Okay, yeah.
So hypothetically, triple Foul can be good. But it's a case of understanding that, like, Salamangreat, you are playing a more control-oriented deck. So the extra extenders aren't important. Like, the difference between my board when I end with Sunlight Wolf plus Dweller versus Sunlight Wolf plus a guy plus my traps generally isn't massive. I think it's more so now. Dweller is like a very valuable resource for Orkest at the moment, or for Salamangreat at the moment. But
everyone playing against Orkest.
Yeah, there's a lot of hate for Orkest in the format.
Mm-hmm. I think more importantly than chain blocking the Balinks is probably chain blocking the Gazelle, enabling you to get that send with the Foul. And also one of the big weaknesses that I've seen in the deck is if they lose their first normal summon on their first turn, they just pass.
Yeah, I mean, the normal summon is super duper important to that deck. But I think that's something that we've seen with the kind of control-oriented decks in the format a lot. Like, since Striker only has one Hornet drones, its normal summon is a lot more valuable as well.
Yes, but they can fall back on a destruction of the Area 0 or multi-roll on Area 0.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why Striker is a deck that I'd prefer to play over Salamangreat, because you have that little bit of extra safety net. But yeah, I think Salad is, like, you need to be comfortable playing against Salamangreat going into the format. Tafin is saying that Cynet mining makes the normal summon less important.
Yeah, that's very fair. I only for the first time saw the interaction this weekend of my opponent discarded a Salamangreat card for Cynet mining and then searched Gazelle and activated Gazelle. And I was like, huh, that's pretty neat.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I mean, you can also do that with Twisters and Spinny if you had a Gazelle in hand.
Yes, but the mining being able to fetch you that Gazelle, I thought was really cool.
It's very cute. The Indian Yu-Gi-Oh! Support is asking, what do we think of Altergeist featuring Mystic Mine? I'm not crazy about Altergeist at the moment. I don't think I've ever been super hot on the deck. I think, like, it feels like such a snowbally deck where it either just has absolutely everything and wins the game, or it doesn't do anything at all.
I felt like Altergeist was sort of just superseded by Salamangreat. There was a period where I was like, why would you play Altergeist when you could play Salamangreat? And I guess Mystic Mine being arguably viable in Altergeist kind of swings that balance back. But if you want to play a Mystic Mine deck that isn't just always ending on 0 monsters, as you are in the Pure Mine deck, I don't see why you wouldn't just go for Sky Striker.
Yeah, exactly. I think it is the case that there's just potentially better options out there. I think it's definitely something that can be explored more, but I personally don't find Altergeist terribly exciting to explore because you have the restrictions on Multifaker. If Multifaker didn't lock you into Altergeist, then I think that deck would do so much more.
Yeah. But yeah, locking you into one archetype of monsters and requiring you to play a threshold number of trap cards really locks down what else you can do with a deck. Because once you need to reliably have trap cards to activate for Multifaker, you can't just start putting in other engines to boost your power.
Yeah. There was somebody, I think, brought up Thunder Dragons, and that's actually a deck that I'd like to talk about, because I think in the first episode of this podcast, or live stream, or whatever we're calling it, I pointed out that going into the fresh format, Thunder Dragons had a really high win rate prior to Dark Neostorm. like 68%. Very small sample period, but still that's like very impressive. And the deck was, it was quite strong. We'd constantly seen it finishing second place at major events. But like if you look at the Yu-Gi-Oh! Scope data for it, it's still one of the more represented decks. It is currently the 6th and 7th most represented. 1,400 games on Danger version, 1,400 on non-Danger version, and they're at 55-56% win rates. So that's like a 10% drop, which is massive. I mean, I personally think the fact that mine exists is a really big hit to the deck. Like, I was playing locals on Thursday. I was playing against Oshin, and I went first, and I ended on... Or no, he went first and ended on a Colossus and some other stuff. He ended on, like, a board that just didn't have many negates. And I basically just, like, did a very small amount of stuff, just played mine, and then I looked at him and I was like, are you playing Sekka's Light? Because if so, we're actually just going to draw until you deck out. And that's what we did. Like, that's a pretty...
You just automatically lose game one if you're playing Sekka Thunder. Sekka anything, pretty much. Just can't beat Mystic Mine.
So I think that's quite interesting because the deck is... It still has a lot of strong stuff. Like, Colossus hits Orkest somewhat. Orkest is probably the deck that it hits the least.
Yeah, Orkest, the actual Orkest combo, not even Rusty. You can activate the effect of your Rusty on the field.
Oh, right, yeah.
And that will get you to the first Fog Blade. And at that point, you have a Fog Blade, you can shut down the Colossus and go from there.
Yeah, okay. So it hits Salamangreat and Striker, which are the two other big decks in the format, but it's just not getting that foothold. It's probably still a solid tier 2 deck, but I do think that it's kind of quite interesting to note how much of a difference.
It's a tier 2 deck, but it's a really expensive tier 2 deck, and anyone that wants to invest that much or has that card pool isn't playing a tier 2 deck.
Yeah, I mean, you basically want to be playing Dangers in the deck, at which point you're probably just playing Orkest. Or if you want to play the big Wombo combo version, you're probably going to...
play Pendulum.
Yeah, exactly.
And you have a deck that does the same kind of thing of putting up this ridiculous turn board, but doesn't hard lose to a significant portion of the meta.
Yeah, exactly. Boom. So I think we've pretty much covered most of the decks in the format and where we feel about them. The only decks that we haven't covered that are on my list, for tier 2, I have Mine Burn. As we mentioned, it seems to be falling off in popularity a bit. As you mentioned, if people are playing Trickstar in Orkest, they're able to deal with it a lot more, and we've also seen Sky Striker not be super popular at events, but be very successful at events, which is very interesting.
Good.
Yeah, and both of those mean that you have good matchups into mine. And then Salamangreat also isn't committing too many cards to the board, I guess. So it seems like Mindburn was kind of the boogeyman when Dark Neostorm came out, and it's just not kind of gotten there yet. Do you think that it might see a resurgence going into the larger nationals, or do you think it was kind of, now that people have shifted to having the spell and trap removal, it's not going to be able to stick?
I think it's difficult for Mindburn to be effective at this point because enough players will have a threshold amount of removal that even if you get a few matches where you just steamroll them because they didn't respect Mindburn, there will be 2, 3, 4 opponents throughout the day that were just a bit more prepared, and like you can't top an event if there are 3 or 4 people that were thoroughly prepared for your like off the wall strategy.
It also has just a terrible mirror match. There is a quick side point that I want to touch off. Somebody in the chat has asked, is giving Highlander format a crack something that we'll be doing, or will we be approaching the format? Once we are finished this competitive season, we are going to be taking a lot of looks at Highlander, at Sealed, at all the different formats. I mean, do you have time to talk about Highlander?
Well, I haven't built a deck for Nationals yet, so...
I mean, I think we will definitely have some discussion about Denko format soon, which is a Highlander-esque format. It is just Highlander, right?
Yeah, it's Highlander. It's like a little sneak preview for anyone that has no idea what we're talking about. It has nothing to do with Denko Seka. It's a custom format that I made along with a couple of my friends, and we first drafted up the list for it around the release of New Challengers, which of course had Denko Seka. We instantly saw that card and were like, wow, this is really good. And the name stuck for no good reason whatsoever. And now we have these. It's most comparable to anyone that's not played it to like a Goat Control mirror match, but with the cards that we didn't like. So like Greed, Graceful Duo just taken out because they weren't much fun, and putting in other cards to replace those and duplicates, and not restricted to cards that were around at Goat Control times. So the likes of... No, Exarion's not in there.
Oh, is it not?
No. But there's much newer cards like Fencing Fire Ferret.
Yeah, I like
which
my ferret.
Just like quite fair, very cool cards, and it makes for a really fun mirror match. Games regularly go into like 20 plus turns with 10 changes of life on either side before you get to the conclusion.
Yeah,
which is really fun. It's very refreshing. Shout out to any of the guys that I've played at events. I always bring 2 copies of the deck with me. So like if I'm not playing between rounds, I'm usually up for a game of that. Just flag me down.
It's a really good format. We will definitely be covering it. I've only played a little bit of it, but I played some of it at the German Open, and it was a lot of fun. But I believe all of the cards for it should be on Legacy of the Duelist. So I might build a deck on that. And once you have a working laptop, we might get you to build a deck on it as well.
Yeah.
Alternatively, you have a Switch, actually. So
I do now, yeah. I tried sorting out the laptop as well, but for whatever, I think I needed to change the formatting on the memory stick to get it to boot from there. It's all complicated, and I don't do computers.
I'll come do tech support at some point. So Denko format and Sealed and Highlander and Draft and Cube are all things that we really love doing. I've been streaming like Battle Pack Sealeds the last few days. So those are certainly stuff that we're going to be touching off. We will get back to our meta-analysis because people have been asking about True Draco, Subterror, and Burning Abyss. So we'll start with True Draco. Alvin has been playing True Draco recently at locals. Ever since I started playing locals in town, Alvin has been doing quite poorly with True Draco. The deck is quite strong, but it suffers from the Draco problems of like, you can open hands where it's like all just spells and traps and then you don't ever do anything. Or you open like demise, triple monster. And I think that still holds the deck back. And when you don't have quite as high a ceiling on the hands, which are your good hands, because you're not ending on Masterpiece, you're just ending on like Dynamite Knight plus traps, which is very strong. Like Dynamite is a really good card. But I think it does suffer from that. And also with mine being less relevant.
Yep.
And the format being so broad, because Draco like is fine into things like Salamangreat, and presumably can be okay into Orkest, but it has a really tough striker matchup.
I actually have a very different take on the matter here.
Okay.
You mentioned that Draco was a hot pick because it had a really good mine matchup, which of course it does.
Mm.
But I was saying before about how Mine Burn isn't a deck that you can really go onto at the moment, because throughout the course of the event, you'll find 3 or 4 people that are very prepared for it. If you're a Draco player and you find 3 or 4 people that were thoroughly prepared for Mine, you've lost. You lose to all the same things that deck loses to. So everyone has got spooked from the first couple of weeks of Dark Neostorm. They're like, oh, Mystic Mine, that's a card. I've lost games to that.
Just shove in all of the Twin Twisters and Typhoons and everything else.
There's so much main decked and side deck back row removal, like quick plays, even things like red reboots. And it's not a good place to be if you're trying to play a true Draco into that kind of format. So it's a deck that's really fallen victim for people side decking more for other decks.
Yeah, for sure. That is the other problem. Alongside just drawing bad hands, you do just lose to Twin Twisters a lot of the time. Zarios is asking what rank is Subterror. I think Subterror is a solid tier 2 deck. Quite a few friends have gotten super close to topping events with it. It's sitting at a 58% win rate with almost 1,300 games. So that's
pretty respectable.
That's a reasonable sample size. It's doing a lot better than Dinosaur, which is 100 games less and at 46%. But yeah, so I think Subterror is really close to being if we didn't have Salamangreat, our striker, then Subterror would be our control deck of the format. But it's a bit heavier on the control and a bit lighter on the win conditions. So that's that basically summarizes its problems. It's one of the few decks that I still see people experimenting with Phantasme in. Talking with James, who is our resident Subterror guru, he seems to not be super hot on Phantasme at the moment, which I would agree with. I think it kind of sits weirdly in the format. But it also conflicts with their Canbies, so it's kind of which would you prefer to play. But yeah, I think Subterror is solid. Do you have any thoughts on the deck?
No.
Yeah, sure. It either has strikes and stuff to stop you comboing, or it dies.
I haven't played against it at all this format. I haven't considered it. I have been in passing aware of its existence, but I've never actually witnessed it myself.
BA is asking, what's your thoughts on Sky Scourge Burning Abyss?
So I'm sure you'll remember that Sky Scourge is a card that I've wanted to play for so long. It's just not playable at the moment. I love Sky Scourge as a card, but there's no way that you're going to be able to force it through going second.
Yeah.
And I doubt you'll effectively be able to push it through when you're going first with a format that's full of the likes of Orkest and Salamangreat that suffer to Ash Blossoms.
There's so much Veiler and Impermanence in the format as well, because that's kind of the traps you need to stop Mermaid.
I'm going to throw my whole hand at putting a Phantom of Chaos on the board and getting it to copy the effect of Norlaris. Oh, Impermanence.
Well, you can hard summon the Norlaris. You have access to the Trickstar engine, which he's pointing out, so you can get Korribane, but it still dies to Veiler.
I appreciate that there are lots of cool ways to build the deck. I have looked into them many times. In a handful of decks that I've wanted to play, both BA decks or pure danger decks or all sorts, because I really like Norlaris. But no, I don't think it works at the moment, and I'm grumpy about it.
Mm-hmm. Eventually, some point, it will be a good card. So I think we've covered all of the decks in the format that I really wanted to touch off. The last thing about the current format that I think is worthwhile looking at is Ren Kazuma asks, is Phantasme still worth it in the main deck, at least for Salamangreat? They say it's only good in the mirror or versus Striker, but Striker plays mine now, so I don't know anymore.
I've generally been like leaning away from Phantasme in just about everything. Salamangreat as a 40-card deck that can play lots of hand traps is better positioned than most to consider Phantasme, but it's borderline to the point where you'd probably want to look at the room that you're playing, have a sort of gauge of what you think you're going to be playing most against, and just judge it from there.
Yeah. I mean, if every single person in the room is playing Salamangreat, card is good.
Yeah.
But again, that kind of leads to the lack of data in terms of approaching events. Like even with the prominence of online dual sims, I don't think we've had nationals which are like super oversaturated with any of the decks that ended up winning. Like Salamangreat is definitely the most represented, but it does seem like Orkest and Striker are probably underrepresented. Orkest definitely has more people playing it, but I think compared to Salamangreat, it's still underrepresented.
Okay.
So Leon is asking for our quick breakdown. So our breakdown is tier 1 is Striker and Salad and Orkest. And then tier 2 is Subs, True Draco, Thunder Dragon, possibly. Remember to add the H. Pendulum in mine.
And then tier 3 is Oak, Sycamore, Pine.
Yes, tier 3. I think Pendulum is borderline.
Yeah, personally, I'd put Pendulum in tier 1, but it doesn't see the kind of representation that you expect from a typical tier 1 deck.
Yeah. So that is our meta-analysis. We have gone through the stuff. Something that I'd like to talk about just a little bit. So my weekend was not spent at any major competitive events. But I instead travelled to Tullamore, which is a small town in Ireland. Well, it's big for an Irish town, but for everybody else, it's a small town in Ireland.
They have a library.
Yeah, they had a really nice library. So I went down for a convention. They had a Yu-Gi-Oh person, but they pulled out last minute. So I went down and I ran an event for them down there. And it kind of reminded me of how I started out, because if you're not living in a city, it can be very difficult for people to get access to Yu-Gi-Oh! And even some cities don't have local game stores.
The Dan Neville origin story.
So I think it's very important to just kind of consider how the game grows, because like for the game to remain as big as it is at the moment, and it's constantly growing at YCSs and stuff, but people having access to tournaments is how the game grows and how the community grows. Like if I didn't play the few tournaments that I got to growing up, then I don't think I would have ever, like, we would not be here talking right now. So I think that's something that I'd love to see explored more by organized play, and something that I'll be kind of spending more time with over the summer is kind of looking at ways for smaller communities to be supported. And like Facebook groups is a really good way for individual players to be supported, but it can be very difficult for people to actually meet up with other players, and I think 90% of the people that I talk to always prefer engaging about Yu-Gi-Oh in person. Like, which is kind of ironic because there is perhaps a presumption that socializing isn't our favorite thing. But, Yu-Gi-Oh is a very social game.
Yeah. I think there are a lot of people that play the game that do so because socializing in general isn't like what comes naturally to most of the group, but finding other people with common ground whom you can socialize with effectively and just have something to talk about because you know that this person speaks like the same language of the card game as you. It just makes it a lot easier, and it's certainly refreshing for people that might otherwise not have any reason to have that kind of social engagement.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, I think that's just kind of a little footnote of something. If you ever get a chance to help people out in terms of getting to play events, then I think it's like super rewarding, and it's a great chance to get more people into the game. There are some interesting questions in the comments. First off, Fun Cyanide brought up Trickstars and Guru. Again, we've touched off Guru. I think Trickstar is reasonably low down on my list. I think if we look at the actual stats on the deck, it's at 51% with 1,500 games played. So that's not a win rate that I would be comfortable taking to an event. Again, kind of like Guru, it lacks the win conditions. Trickstar gets better the better Droll is.
Fun fact, Trickstar is my second choice deck at the moment.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
That's possibly largely because I don't like learning decks and I find it very difficult to do. So like, as most people might have guessed, having listened to the start of the stream so far, Pendulum would be my second choice, but I think it would take me so long to get to a level that I'd be comfortable playing it effectively, that I would like lose out on a lot of enjoyment. But I think that I could probably play Trickstar to a pretty high standard, and I think it actually lines up really well right now. I don't think that there are too many matchups where it would really be struggling. Obviously, it can be reliant upon die rolls, but yeah, I think that Trickstar is a heavily underrated deck in the current format.
I mean, again, this kind of shows the failings of something like Yu-Gi-Oh! Scope. It's like we have raw data, but that doesn't necessarily mean that conclusions, like obvious conclusions, are actually the case. Like, we don't know how many.
I could just be wrong.
Decks. Yeah, I mean, that can be the case too. We don't know from that data, but it can be a good way to inform yourself. There's an interesting question here from Max Tim about, or I think it was, no, sorry, it is Pocket Trumpeter V2 who asked, do you have any tips for how to keep an eye on meta tech choices week by week to inform your own deck building? I think this is a really interesting question because there's quite a few different ways to go about it. There's the kind of like the low effort approach from my point of view, which is go to locals, play locals, and try and figure out what cards would be good against what you faced there, because you can pull on the kind of communal pool of knowledge because everybody else is being informed by the outside world, and so you can pull that and use it as kind of a lens to decide what you want to play. Obviously,
the bigger the sample size, so like locals is one, but if you can look at the events that are going on elsewhere through, like, there are so many deck profiles published to Facebook, and you can just see what's popular there. And like, if you can get deck breakdowns for anything, it becomes like a lot more significant the information that you have on that shift rather than just your own locals. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with just going to locals, but like I think the bigger tournaments that you can attend and the bigger tournaments that you can look at the results from, the much more effective that strategy becomes.
For sure. And that's where you get to kind of, the internet is a massive resource, just seeing what people have played. But that's very time consuming, is the thing. Like, you do have to put a lot of time and effort into that. Somebody was asking about your list. We will be posting that list later on.
Sorry. Yeah. I still had one more point on that previous question. On text, I think that the number one most important thing to keep track of that sort of thing week on week is to find yourself a group of friends who are interested and have a group chat. Like, it doesn't have to be like a team, but if you have like a group that want to, you can function like a team without like any real requirements. You could just call yourself a team and you'd be one. And just having that shared interest in having the information and knowing what's going on means that everyone can be looking out for new cards, new techs, new decks, new things that are performing well, new things that have fallen off the radar. And if everyone puts in a little bit of what they've observed, you come up with a really quite broad understanding of the game for only a very small contribution from each person. Yeah. Like, I'll post 2 things in a week into the group chat, and if everyone else posts 2 things a week into the group chat, we have 40 things that are observations on the current format per week.
Yeah, I think, again, that kind of ties into the idea of getting a communal knowledge pool is the best way to improve. And this is kind of just like general life advice. If you want to improve at something, surround yourself with people who are immersed in the topic. Because when you discuss that way, like, that's just how human civilization gains knowledge, is we take a little bit of knowledge and everybody chucks a little bit in and it grows from there. And that's the best way to improve as a player.
If you're in a situation where you don't have other players on your level or better than you around you, help the other players who are around you get onto your level, and then they can feed back to you to help you both grow together.
Yeah. Just one second. So BA is asking how to get better specifically at the local level. I think something good, particularly the way I started improving at locals, is, like you said, I started engaging with like James, who's on the team now. He had joined CCG around the time that I started talking to him. Back old CCG. But it was through talking with him, and I would start kind of like just meeting up with people in town, going to like a Starbucks and testing, that I really started progressing my gameplay. And also judging was a really massive thing for me. It meant that I was engaging with the game a lot, even though I wasn't playing the game. So even just watching people play and figuring out why are they doing that? Like, why is he making that move? What is the combo that this deck does, and how does it do it? If you're going to be practicing, it's important that you're practicing against other people, because goldfishing, if you are starting out, goldfishing is not sufficient. So goldfishing being playing by yourself. Once you have that super kind of strong, intricate connection with the game, you can start getting away with goldfishing a lot more. But you also need to be bouncing ideas off people, because you can get to this like superb combo, like Sky Scourge Norlas, where it's like, yeah, this is insane. But sometimes you just need that extra context to, like, you know, you will develop something. So, like, I often go on my Noble Knight spree where I'll be like, oh, Noble Knight is broken, best deck ever. And then
Oh
I'll
no.
post the list, and everybody will be like, "But you lose to evenly matched," and I'll be like, "Oh, yeah, that's a card," and people are playing it. And
We don't
so
say that. We say you'll lose to Effect Jailer or
I can't hear you. I can't
like
hear you.
any piece of interaction in the game.
That's why I just always open Cold Grave, clearly, and Midbreaker.
Impermanence.
Ren Kazuma is asking, is Ping Zhao still around? Dr. Ping Zhao is still around. He had been on holiday recently, so he wasn't playing events, but he will definitely be at UK National Championships if we don't see him sooner than that. As time goes on, we're going to be getting other Kuribrohs in here for guest appearances, so we just want to make sure that the stream is running and we don't have technical difficulties. At which point, at which point we can start pulling other people in because I don't know how computers work. I'm getting there. We're getting there. But yeah, there will be more Ping Zhao in the future.
Whilst we're in this little lull, you noted goldfishing there. I just want to like make the note that I think that goldfishing can really bias how you build decks if that's your only method that you're using for testing. Because I find that a lot of people, when they are goldfishing, particularly combo-based decks, if they draw a dead hand, they shuffle it back up and they draw another one. So you always end up in this sort of vacuum where you only ever see the hands where you didn't have to play through interaction and you didn't open any garnets and you just see like the best case scenario. And then you have to look at the outcome of that and think, okay, so how easy was it to interrupt and how many awful cards have I had to include in my deck to be able to build this silly turn one board? But you see like a lot of it gets posted on Facebook groups with like, check out my turn one board. And everyone's like, oh, post the list. This looks amazing. And I'm like, it looks like it has a lot of garnets. Not sure how I feel about that.
Yeah. Yeah, like, again, you can learn a lot about cards and interactions from goldfishing, but it is important to ground that testing. London Paperclip asks an interesting question that I would like to tackle. So they say they recently started running tournaments at a locals. They've got an OTS status and applied for their first sneak peek. It says peek, but I will assume that that's sneak peek. What else can they do to help their scene grow? So I ran a locals for about 2 years. I recently moved away from it because running a locals conflicts with attending events, and I just couldn't give it the amount of time that I wanted to. So from my point of view, the best way to run a locals is to build a relationship with your players. Locals, depending on the age group of your players, obviously. For the younger players, locals is just a weekly event which they go to play Yu-Gi-Oh! And that's what they're engaging with. When you get to older players, like Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a lifestyle for us. It's the same way that people go and they play as part of a soccer team, or they have their hobbies. So it's important to recognize that when you're organizing your events and how you're interacting with your players, I think. So like something that I used to do at my locals was I would socialize with the players afterwards. So I would run a Tuesday evening locals, and after locals in the evening, we'd either go down to Weatherspoons or we'd go up to the Chinese and get food, and I would socialize and chat with the guys that way. And I think that's a really good way because it's really important that people go to locals because of everything around it and not just the game. Because basically, when people are just going for the social aspect, it means even if they're not crazy about the format, or their deck gets hit, or, sometimes people are just not feeling like playing Yu-Gi-Oh! That day, they'll turn around and they'll be like, oh, but I'll get to see everybody, so I'm going to go to locals anyway, and that's the best way to kind of build up a base. And once you have a healthy base for your game, the players are just going to start bringing their friends, and word of mouth will spread it that way. It's a lot of work, but it's also a lot of fun getting to engage with everybody that way. But that's my general thoughts.
I definitely don't have as much experience as Dan on this one, but I think one of the most important things for building up an OTS community is to have a really good social media presence. It doesn't have to be like anything that you put any money into. It doesn't have to be anything particularly remarkable, but making it so that you have like a Facebook page or a Facebook group that is very easily findable.
Yes.
So like the name of the city that you're in, Yu-Gi-Oh, like just make sure that it has like keywords that people might be searching for. So like if I wanted to find a locals, I might type in Bristol Yu-Gi-Oh, and like if that was in the name of a group, I'd be like, oh, people are playing, and then have very visibly as like a pinned post within that group the time and location of like meetups or local tournaments, so that anyone that hasn't been before and doesn't have a direct connection to the people that have will be able to find it, come along, see what's going on, and just get into that group. So you need to like minimize the possible barriers that might be preventing people from engaging, because a lot of people, if they can't immediately find a way in, will give up and assume that it's not easily doable, or the community's dead, or just having that sort of reassurance that it is worth coming out for, people are doing it, people are enjoying it. And yeah, I've said it before, but like being findable.
Yeah.
If people can't find your page, they won't come.
Yeah. Sneak peeks and regionals are also super important because you get to players that find you through the Yu-Gi-Oh card website. I know when I started out as a player, the way that I found all of the locals I went to was I would look up when the sneak peek was and I would go to that. Because it always has the most up-to-date information, whereas the list of stores can sometimes be outdated. So I've also just posted in the chat to get to know Ben Level, yeah, because he is your organized play person. So it is good to have connections and to like be able to reach out when something goes wrong, because I've seen a lot of stores who have like lost OTS status because stuff goes wrong and they just don't reach out for help from the organized play, and then they get frustrated and everything falls apart. So don't let that happen. If you're having issues, do reach out.
I think that again on the social media front, and this one, like you have to be very delicate about this, because if you go about it in the wrong way, you can start making enemies, which is definitely not what you're trying to do when you're building up a community. Is communicate with the other stores that are the closest other stores to you. If there is a way that you can make sure that the tournaments that you're running isn't conflicting the time, so if they're doing a Saturday locals, you might want to do a Sunday one, so that it's not forcing the players to choose one or the other, then it's much more likely that you'll be able to sort of coexist with that group, and you might even be able to ask their group if you could post on their Facebook page, hey, there's this new locals that's opened up that you could go to as well as that one. If you want to come here and play some games, see what it's like, and just grow the communities together. And obviously that can be jarring, particularly if you were trying to host something on the same day. So it's always important to ask permission if you want to advertise your group in another group.
Yes, for sure.
So yeah, don't go rushing into like jumping on other people's groups, because it might be seen as like an attack trying to steal their customers for you, but that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to grow the community, and oftentimes like there are multiple locals in Bristol where people will go straight from one locals to another one, and the timings are done very well such that it is deliberately to allow people to play in multiple events if they choose to.
Yeah, and people will quite happily play at multiple locals, especially when there is that kind of healthy relationship between the local stores. Especially when you get to regional season, it is really good if you have a healthy relationship with the nearby locals, because if you both apply for regionals on a back-to-back weekend, you're more likely to get it. You get more players, which is all fantastic.
And consider the fact that if you are a store that's willing to open late on a weekday evening, even if there's a crowd of locals that are trying to compete for weekends, like there are very successful evening meetups, just sort of 3 or 4 round tournaments that go on really well. Like players that want to play a lot will happily play multiple days a week.
So Little Sheep, who has been in the chat before, so welcome back, wants to know if Danger PK Fire is good in the meta right now. He's been testing it for a long time for nationals, and he was wondering if he could discuss it with you at all, Tom.
I think that the Danger Phantom Knight Burning Abyss deck is definitely much better positioned than the Sekka's Light one, owing that it can afford to main deck, say, a set of Mystical Space Typhoon or Twin Twisters to avoid having the auto loss to any decks on Mystic Mine. And you can also put in the Orkest cards if you want to have a very small engine there that gives you another combo that you can end on. I think personally, looking at it from a purely competitive point of view, I don't see a reason for playing that deck over the Orkest deck. If your goal isn't to optimize your win percentage, yeah, it looks really fun. Like Cherubini is a card that I would love to play if I didn't care about my win rate. It's just not a deck that I think that is sensible if your goal is to win as much as possible. And it's another one where sort of if you always go first and you never draw your garnets, you make broken boards and you can do really cool stuff. So you need to consider what your meta is. If you're likely to be facing up against a lot of Mystic Mine, it probably doesn't fit in well. If you think that the meta you'll be playing against isn't that way inclined, then yeah, it could be worth a go. You'll need to put a significant amount of thought into what happens in the games that you need to play second, what happens in the games where you need to play through a lot of back row. But there's no reason why it's not a viable deck. It's just not the best deck right now.
Yeah. So we are now opening the floor to questions and answers. So people are going to ask questions and we will potentially give answers. Maybe sometime we should do the questions and chat can do the answers. That sounds like
that sounds
format. Reversal quiz. That's what we'll call the segment. So BA is asking, what decks do you play casually? I'm assuming that is a case of pretty much all of your Yu-Gi-Oh time is put into regionals at the moment, right?
Yeah,
You play draft?
Almost
casually.
I play draft very occasionally. But yeah, I don't really play any Yu-Gi-Oh at all outside of regionals. Like I go to a regional most weeks, sometimes 2. And yeah, that's about it. I do. I'm quite actively engaged in the team group chat on Facebook where we do theory.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I play cards once a week at regionals. I discuss them on stream, and I discuss with the team in the group chat. I guess the deck that I play casually is Hearthstone Arena Draft.
Again, it is a case that you're like super focused in on the WCQ points race at this point. So like there isn't really time to like between that and just general life, there isn't much time to be messing about with other stuff.
There's a lot of life, and like I want to be able to like put a lot of time into non-Yu-Gi-Oh things. So once you allow for the fact that I'm spending 1 or 2 days every weekend playing tournaments
for like really long periods of time as well.
And then Monday evening I'm streaming, so like that leaves 4 nights a week. I do another hobby. I'm sailing every Wednesday, so that leaves 3 nights. I want to spend as much time as I can with my girlfriend. Like she gets the short straw with me trying to go to Worlds in that I'm busy so much of the time. So it wouldn't be at all fair on her if I was playing a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh! Outside of what I have to do to pursue my goal of getting to Worlds. I really like spending my free time just relaxing with her.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Moving on to the next question. Any spicy tech from the new set for zombies? I played against zombies recently at locals. I don't think there is much that you need to add to zombies because you already have such the kind of core identity cards of Mizuki, Unizombie, Gozuki, Baller Druck, and then you have like the Banshee and the Globe Bloom. So like because it's a combo deck, it's much more difficult to really just add cards in. So I don't think there's really much. You could consider playing something like Crackdowns if you wanted to have a bit of back row, but you can already just play Rivalry and Gozen in the deck, and I think those have better coverage. Or else.
Yeah, the only thing that I could possibly think of is if there would be some interesting way of making a combo with World Chalice Justicar, the new level 5 synchro.
Yeah.
But no, I can't think of anything specifically from the new set outside of teching in an engine for either World Chalice Justicar or an Orkest package with Dingesu. So I don't think that deck has seen much development with Dark Neostorm.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Giles Dale asks, what's your opinion on Orkest in general, and which build do you think is the best? I think it's safe to assume that your opinion is probably quite high.
My deck's the best deck. It's the best deck.
So how many cards are in the deck of the best deck? Are you on 60 still, or
50 and then another 20?
Okay, like all the cards. You need as many cards in your deck box as possible because
I don't think that that's necessarily the best deck. I think that is the best deck for me to play right now. I obviously love it. I have played it for every single event since I first played it on the 3rd of February, which was the day after I played my last ever game with Burning Abyss. Well,
for this season. For this
season, that was a regional, like a couple of days after the list where Fairy Tail Snow got banned. I played one tournament with Burning Abyss. I actually did quite well, but it felt weak. So I moved on the next day and have been really happy on Orkest with, like, I think now 16 tier 2 events played. And yeah, 16 tier 2 events played, of which 12 I topped. So
and one tier 3 win.
Oh yeah, technically now that's the thing. Sure. But yeah.
I think your Orkest story is a bit more interesting than that, because we discussed Burning Abyss a lot in the months of January and February. Like, I think that is one of the decks which I have discussed the most out of any, and it wasn't even all necessarily deck theory. You did want to get to Worlds with Burning Abyss.
Yeah, I wanted to play the entire season with Burning Abyss, but clearly other people who are in charge of the Thin and Limited list did not want me to play the entire season with Burning Abyss. So that sadly fell down. Yeah,
but it was quite a dilemma for you. It wasn't just a case of being like, oh, I'm just going to play Orkest now, as much as you might have made it seem like on YCS stream. Like, it is, when you like a deck and when you've put so much time and kind of heart into building the deck, it is very difficult to let a deck like that go, especially when you have so much history with it. But obviously, you're secretly actually the Phantom Knight Master, because you have 2 YCS wins with Phantom Knights, and you only have 1 YCS win with Burning Abyss. So
But I do have a national swim with Burning Abyss.
Ah, shush. That's UK Nationals. Does anybody care about UK Nationals? I do. Ben probably does. You do. Yeah, no. UK Nationals was the same size as YCS Liverpool, possibly bigger than it.
It was smaller.
It was pretty
YCS
close.
Liverpool, I think, was 960 maybe.
I think Liverpool was
UK
like
Nationals was 700 and something.
727. I think Liverpool was like 836, somewhere in that region.
I had to play more rounds for UK Nationals because it was a top 64 instead of a top 32.
Huh, that's kind of weird.
And then more rounds again for Düsseldorf for obvious reasons.
Yes, slightly more rounds.
2 more.
I mean, that's not too bad, but... Little Sheep wants to send on his list. Little Sheep, if you want to send your list to the Team Kuribrohs Facebook page, to the messenger there, then Tom can take a look when he gets a chance. I don't know when he will have time, but when he does get a chance, he will look through it. Where does True Draco fit into the meta? As we said earlier, Arik, we figure it's kind of around tier 2 because it had been a great choice against mine week 1 of Dark Neostorm format. Now that everybody is playing spell and trap removal, the deck becomes a lot worse. Still, like, has strong hands and stuff, but it just is inconsistent compared to the other decks. Regarding being confident with a deck for a major event, what tier 1 deck has the lowest skill ceiling / is easiest to master? Before you bring in your point, I think it's important to note that mastery of your deck at tier 2 events and higher is not the biggest decider in how many games you're going to win. So being comfortable with your deck is very important, but like understanding how to play large tournaments is as important, if not more so. Like, I visited you guys over in the UK for a few regionals recently, and I've been playing Striker since I picked up the deck in like August of last year, but I changed over to Orkest for those events, and I didn't know the deck very well. And this was pre-Dark Neostorm. But like, just from being confident in the tournament, even when I made mistakes, I was still able to win games that through gameplay alone I probably shouldn't have. So I think that's something that I would consider quite important. And being on a deck you're comfortable on makes that a lot easier.
Okay. So one of the things that I would look at here is you are quite right to consider choosing a deck which you can get to a good place with, rather than trying to do a mistake that a lot of people make, which is playing the best deck and playing it awfully. And I think it's not just about the deck choice, but it's also about how you play it. And we've mentioned this one before, but it's very important to be sort of like introspective when you're choosing what to take to a tournament. Yeah. You need to accurately assess how good and comfortable of a player are you with the deck. If you
have to be very honest with yourself.
Yeah. If you think that you are a really excellent player, play a deck that has a very high ceiling and can get around any situation where your opponent is trying to lock you out of a game. So play things like outs to floodgates, play things that mean that you don't lose to any deck in the meta because you think that if you get to play every game, you're most likely to win them because you can play better than your opponent. But the converse of that is, if you don't think that you're the best player in the room, and you want to optimize your win percentage, work out how you can win games without having to play better. Now, an easy way of going about that is something that can main deck floodgates. You need to be very careful to consider what floodgates are effective. And it's important to note that right now, spell and trap floodgates, which are generally the go-to, have taken a bit of a suffering due to the increase in spell and trap removal. So maybe look to things like Thunder Dragon Colossus or Naturia Beast, or even just
Like
the Pendulum
Jinso.
deck being able to throw out like 4 negates it's kind of like a floodgate at that point.
Yep.
It's just like, I'm going to negate every card that you activate. If you get to a point where you don't let your opponent play the game, it doesn't matter how good they are. It doesn't matter if they're better than you, because they can't play Yu-Gi-Oh! And you just win by default at that point. So if you're looking for that kind of thing, a deck like Trickstar is really neat, because having mentioned that Spell and Trap floodgates don't work, Draw and Lock Reincarnation doesn't lose to Spell and Trap removal in the same way. So you can get a lot of mileage out of something like that. So that may not be the exact correct choice, but I think that it's important to look for something where you can win games easily rather than trying to win every game.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of thought to be put into that sort of stuff. In terms of like the stuff that we had listed as tier 1, Salamangreat would fall into that category, because you can play their Canbies and you have the trap cards. And
you can play Artifact Sanctum as well.
Yeah.
That's a floodgate that absolutely doesn't lose to Twin Twisters.
Yeah. Fun Cyanide asks, any thoughts on some of the different engines in Orkest, such as DD, Lamia, and Contract, or Mining and Ibly, or the Assault Mode package? Just quick answers on this.
Mining and Ibly. I didn't like Ibly before Mining, and Mining doesn't make it any better. DD Lamia, kind of cool. It loses to Ghost Ogre on the Search on the Contract, which is like a hand trap that you weren't previously losing to, so building in weakness, not great. And it also can be taken out by Spell and Trap removal if you're going second. What was the other one?
Assault Mode.
Assault Mode. Yeah, that one's really cool. It's neat in that it lets you play another starter that doesn't require your normal summon in Emergency Teleport.
Yeah.
But you only get one Emergency Teleport, and you have to put in 2 Garnets into the deck.
Yeah.
So in that regard, doesn't seem great. I like it most because it's very cool. But I think I would rather play the Time Thief starters if I wanted something interesting. And I would rather play Trickstars, Sky Strikers, and Connectors if I wanted something good.
Mm-hmm. Derek Taylor asks, how do you win the Orkest mirror match? One good way is winning dice rolls. Do you have any other thoughts? What would you consider your key card? Because we're running out of time, so we will go somewhat quick, I think.
Considering when to use Crescendo is very important in the Orkest mirror match, and there isn't a simple answer to the question of when is correct, but for the most part, players only play one, so you have to make it count.
Yeah.
And then besides that, it's just obvious things like drawing hand traps, which you can't control when you do, but you can control how many you play. So.
Yeah. Do you think Draco must be played without extra deck to be good? I think either variant of Draco is good at the moment. I don't consider Erupt too good. Again, Spell and Trap removal is too prevalent to really make Erupt good. Things like Anti-Spell is a lot scarier.
Yep, and I think that revealing that you're playing Draco before you even start the game could be a disadvantage.
Yeah. Sasha Hammer asks, do you guys think that Super Poly should go back to 1? I don't think it's doing anything crazy at the moment. I would like to see the card banned and have a version of the card which just doesn't have the can't be responded. Yeah.
Yep.
0 sounds reasonable, but like there's no difference between 1 and 2. It's like it's trivial, the difference between those ratios. Whereas 0
it's a really silly card.
Okay. Boop, boop, boop. We have our Ghost Sister and Dogwood and No Materials slept on, or are they bad cards? I mean, they're hand traps, so they're situational. At some point, they may be relevant, but until they tackle a problem that the meta produces, they're not going to see play.
the current meta is diverse, and neither of those cards are highly effective against the majority of the meta. When the meta shifts, either of them could see play. I think that No Material is probably the more likely of the two to be relevant most, but they are definitely both cards that could see play in the appropriate format. They aren't being slept on per se, because they just aren't good at the moment for the most part. But that's not to say that they won't be very good at some point in the future. I think No Material will definitely have its time, and Ghost Sister could do as well. I don't know how that one will play out.
That kind of touches on, segueing here, it touches on logical fallacy, which comes up a lot in card games, which is I really like this card, I think this card is good, and then it becomes good, and so you say, oh, well, I knew this was good before it was good, and it's a case of, like situationally, so many cards can be good. Like, you can point at most cards and say, yeah, this card's going to be amazing one day, but it's kind of, it's like if people say, oh, hey, I was playing Salamangreat before the structure deck, I knew the deck was going to be good. It's not really comparable there. It's like they're so inherently different, and you're not finding how it's good against the format. You're just making a statement without having any actual figures to back it up. I don't think I explained that very well, but it's something to be aware of. You can sleep on cards, but it's understanding when they are good that's important, not understanding the potential value of a card.
For the most part, information travels quickly, that very few cards get really, truly slept on. If they aren't seeing play, it's often because they aren't good. And most of the time, it's because they aren't good.
Yeah. We are going to take a final question, because we need to go and live our lives, unfortunately. So, interesting, thought-provoking question. More power or more consistency for your deck choice? Which would you go with?
If you think you're the best player in the room, more consistency, because you will win your games by being better than your opponent. If you don't think that you're the best player in the room, more power, because you're more likely to spike a win, and you need variance to win the event anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that kind of comes to the thing of, like, do you feel lucky going into the event? If so, you just play the greediest deck possible if you feel lucky, because if you're gonna win, then that's the best deck to win if you don't feel capable of carrying it on a consistent deck. I think that is everything we have to say this week. Thank you all so very much for joining us. We will be back again next Monday with another TKB Live. We have everything working now, so we should be able to actually get these out consistently. Again, if you top any events, please do get in touch with us on Facebook or YouTube, because we'd love to feature decks. If you have anything you'd like us to cover, reach out to us as well. And from myself and Thomas, we hope you all have a lovely evening and an excellent week.